Well, hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us once again. My name is Dan Hurley. I am the chair-elect and a director with the Vancouver Island Economic Alliance. I'm also the principal and co-founder of the Hurley Martin Group of Public Relations and Engagement Partnership located on Gabriola Island. I want to acknowledge that we are on the traditional territories of the Coast Salish, the Kwakiwak, and Nuchaluk peoples. This is now our 14th session in VIEA's video series to unite and connect decision makers from around the Gulf Island and Vancouver Island regions, and our ability to inform and engage economic vitality and the economic recovery of the road ahead. Today, we are pleased to have Sean Moorfield, who is Senior Manager with MNP's consulting team based in Saskatoon, specializing in performance improvement. And since the impact of COVID-19, he has been spending a lot of time advising clients on how to manage the various government programs and cash flow, especially the federal work-share program, which will be the focus of our discussion today. But before we begin, some notes about the format of our session. Our presentation will take about 10 minutes, at which time we will then turn it over to some questions and answers for the remaining 15 to 20 minutes of the session. To ask your question, please use the chat function in your Zoom screen at the bottom of the screen. Enter it and address it to me, and I'll get to as many questions as we can today. If for some reason we're not able to get to your question today, please email it to our president, George Hansen, at george@VIEA.ca. And we just asked everyone to please keep your mutes on and your cameras off throughout the session. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Sean. Sean, welcome to the VIEA Zoom room from sunny Saskatoon.
Perfect. Thanks, Dan. Thanks so much for having me. So yeah, I'm here to chat about the Workshare program. First, what I'll do is I'll share my screen just to ensure that everyone can see my presentation. And Dan, can you let me know if this is popping up all right?
Yeah, looks great.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, I'm here to chat about the Workshare program. And this is a program that is an EI-based program. It predates COVID, so it's not a program that was designed specifically for COVID, like the CUES program. It's been around for a while. I can't remember the exact origin, but we've been using it for about 15 years, helping our clients apply for the program. It's a good program, and I think it has a big part to play in sort of the months and year to come, especially after CUES and hopefully COVID is over. So. That being said, I'll sort of jump into the program. I'll go over it at a high level and where we see fitting in from a long-term strategic perspective. But at a 10,000-foot view, the Workshare program is a program that allows employers to retain staff on a schedule that is beneficial to the organization while allowing your employees to recoup some, remuneration for the hours that they're no longer working. So essentially, the government is covering a drop in hours for your employees. So to illustrate how it works, I'll just use a simple example. So let's take any organization with a department or departments of employees who are used to working 5 days a week. Something happens, i.e. COVID or some other economic event, and suddenly the volume of work has dried up, and employers are looking for a way to maintain that schedule. Under the terms of a Workshare agreement, what can happen is if we have a group of employees who, let's say, are used to working 5 days a week, but the employer can only afford to pay for half their time, i.e. 2.5 days a week. Under the terms of the Workshare agreement, the employer would go ahead and do that. They would staff their facility or their organization with those people for 2.5 days a week, and the other 2.5 days a week, they'd put their employees on a Workshare program. And essentially what would happen for the employee is that they would collect EI benefits for those hours that they're no longer working. And from the employer's perspective, they're not paying out the full labor cost for the entire week. So it provides some flexibility with regards to the amount of working hours. So at a 10,000-foot view, that's how it works. In terms of what I like about this program, there's a couple of things. Number one, the length at which we can stay on the program. So historically, pre-COVID, the maximum that any organization was allowed to stay on the program was 38 weeks. Since COVID, that has been amended to 76 weeks. I like that for a number of reasons. Number one, I'm of the belief that as soon as restrictions and all this COVID business is done, the economy and businesses aren't going to snap back to where they were pre-COVID. It's going to take some time to ramp back up to pre-COVID volumes. What the workshare allows you to do is, from an employer's perspective, it allows you to match the amount of work coming in with the number of hours that you're paying out over a longer haul. So you can essentially get a little bit of support over the long run. The other thing that I do like about the program is its flexibility. So in the example I gave before, when employers went from 5 days a week to 2.5 days a week, a lot of the questions that we get are, does that schedule have to remain static? And the answer is no. You can flex your employees' hours up and down over the course of the work-share agreement. And I like that because, if we do suddenly get a big bulge in work for a week or two, we can bring back our staff full-time. And then if volume drops off after that, we can cater that back down. So it provides a little bit of flexibility for employers with regards to the amount of work volume coming in. So it doesn't need to be static, and you don't have to work around that schedule. The program works for you in that regard. The other thing that I do like is sort of the eligibility of the program. So for Qs, we have to display, a 15% drop in revenue for period 1, and then 30% drop in revenue for the subsequent period. With the work-share program, it's a little bit more flexible in that regard. Now, historically, what we had to show to be eligible for the program was a 10% drop in company-wide revenue. Since COVID hit, they've actually taken off that revenue number on the application. So there's essentially no real pre-qualifier. The only thing that you have to show to remain on the program is that the employees who are on the work sharing program are experiencing at least a 10% drop in working hours. And that's kind of the bottom range in terms of whether or not an employee or a group of employees is eligible, is that we have to display a minimum of a 10% drop in working hours. And sort of on the flip side, the maximum that the EI program, or the workshare program, will cover is up to 60%. So I look at it in days just to simplify it. So at the bare minimum, we have to show a reduction of 0.5 working days, and the government will cover up to a maximum of 3 working days. So conceivably, employers could reduce their payroll costs by up to 60% for the departments that they put on the work-share application. So that's kind of the eligibility period and how that works. A couple other notes that have obviously been a little bit more prominent is, number one, how does it play with the wage subsidy? And it is a stackable program, i.e. we can use both at the same time. All that would happen is simply whatever an employee receives from the workshare program would simply be deducted from the amount that they're eligible for under SUSE. All right, so there is some crossover there. The sort of last thing that I'll sort of leave everyone with before we get to some questions is the strategy. And I touched on this a little bit before, where the Qs program is fantastic in terms of the remuneration. It's the best one out there. However, that is going to end at a certain point. It was announced today that it's going to be extended into August. The way we were positioning this with our clients and with the people or the organizations that we're working with is, again, think of it like insurance, right? Where it's not necessarily a program that is there to, pay you to pay your employees to keep them working. It provides a little bit of support, a little bit of added cushion, and more than anything, what it allows organizations to do is buy time when volumes are going up and down, because there is going to be an adjustment period. And quite frankly, as it stands right now, there isn't another program out there like this one that's going to be as beneficial when SUSE ends, unless another program is released, of course. But as best we know right now, that's sort of the biggest program that will be, I guess, flocked to after Qs. And one of the things that we're fully expecting is once Q starts to wind down and there's no announcements about renewing the program and things of that nature, we think that there's going to be a big flood to the WorkShare program, just because, again, in the long term, it is a really good program that does provide a good amount of stability. And again, I'm going to call it support. So in terms of any of the other details, I don't want to get too much into that. So perhaps what we'll do now, if it works for Dan and George, is why don't we jump to some of the questions, and we can keep it rolling from there.
Well, thanks very much, Sean. That was quite comprehensive. Maybe you can maybe we could start, and just you've covered some of that, but maybe you can kind of go through a summary of what a company needs to do to prepare for an application to this program. What would that look like? What would they need to have ready to go if they're going to work with a company or a firm like yours to apply?
Yeah, great question. Great question. So in terms of the application process, it's a fairly straightforward application. Anyone can download the form from the Government of Canada website and fill it out. It's fairly straightforward information, but Dan, you touched on a great point. In terms of the program itself, it's a very linear program, or at least, the way it was created was a very linear program. And what I mean by that is, under the terms of the WorkShare agreement, what you have to do is when you apply, you have to set up work sharing units. And a work sharing unit is a group of comparable positions in an organization. So, if this is a mechanic shop, you'd put your receptionists in, one work sharing unit, and you'd put your mechanics in, another work sharing unit. So under the terms of the work sharing agreement, when work comes in for a work sharing unit, that work needs to be equally distributed amongst the individuals in that specific work sharing unit, right? And for the most part, that's not a problem. But one of the things that you really have to think through when you're putting together a work sharing unit for the application is, are my work sharing units set up correctly? And I'll share an example of how not to do it. So using the mechanic example, and I'm going to butcher the technical terms, but just bear with me. We redid an application for a large mechanic shop, and originally what they had done is they had taken all their mechanics and put them in one work sharing unit just because that's what they read online. The problem with that is that if you actually looked at the mechanics, some of them only knew how to work on Dodges, some of them only knew how to work on Chevys, and some of them only knew how to work on Teslas. So when work did come in, let's say it was a Dodge, they had to take that work for that Dodge and distribute it equally amongst the individuals in the work sharing unit. So what ended up happening for this company is they were giving, Dodge mechanic work to a Tesla person who had no idea what they were doing. So part of the challenge with the WorkShare application is just thinking through how you want to set up the work sharing units. And what we suggest doing is doing it by functional area, not necessarily by job type. So in the example of the mechanic, the functional area would have been, we have a Dodge mechanic, we have a Chevy mechanic, and we have a Tesla mechanic, as opposed to setting it up by, mechanic, which is sort of the broader overarching job description. So to sort of summarize that entire spiel, when you set it up, you want to set up the application itself. In the first couple of pages, anyone can do it. It's very straightforward. You just have to have some payroll information and things of that nature. And then the work sharing unit is really when the strategy comes into play, because you want to make sure that whoever's in a work sharing unit, you're happy sharing work with those individuals. Right. So again, back to the Dodge and the Chevy example, you don't want to have a Dodge mechanic and a Chevy mechanic in the same working unit. You want to have them separated out so that when Dodge work comes in, your Dodge people can do it. And when Chevy work comes in, your Chevy people can do it.
So in other words, in the application, you're able to distinguish those groups as it fits your company.
Yes, absolutely. And it's again, the government is very linear in sort of its thinking, because there's someone on the other side of, the application who's taking it, and they're going to look and say, hey, a mechanic versus a mechanic, why aren't they together? So when we do the application, we just have to have a good reason as to why we're setting it up that way. It's really easy to get it, to come up with a business case and get it approved right the first time. It's really, really tough to go back and make an amendment to an already existing work sharing unit. So it's best to have those conversations up front about how you want to set up the work sharing unit. And the other thing too that I would think about when you're putting together the work sharing unit, think about, and this is going to sound condescending, and it's not supposed to be, but a lot of times what we've seen is people think about filling out the work share application for the next couple of weeks in terms of how they set up the work share applications. But what we're really encouraging organizations to do is think out sort of longer term, because if this whole thing is over in, I don't know, a month or two, but we want to stay on for 50 weeks, you want to set up your application for the units that is going to make the most sense for the longest period of time.
So just that's a good point. So in terms of the timing, as you mentioned, we just heard this morning that the federal government is extending the wage subsidy to the end of August. So your advice is to get signed up now, but you don't necessarily have to access this program right away, or could you do both?
Yeah. So you could do both. You could access this program right away and hop onto the queues as well. What we're suggesting to our clients and to the organizations that we're working with is, whenever we think that there's going to be a definitive end to the queues program, let's have an application in place for before that end, whether it's a week, 2 weeks, whatever that is. So fill out the applications proactively. I wouldn't advise, filling out an application, let's say now for the end of August. There is no verbiage that really says you can't do that. We submit applications for forecasted drops in volume, a month out. I don't know what that magic number is, but what I would say is, the government, it takes about 10 days to apply for the, or to receive approval for the program once you've submitted. I think that towards the end of queues, this is going to get super busy and everyone's going to be bogged down. So what I'm thinking is that about 3 weeks before we think that the queues program is going to end, submit an application just to give ourselves a bit of time, and we can put the start date for the program out a month or however long we want within reason.
So one of the questions that we have here has to do with EI. So EI is involved here. What impact does this have on EI eligibility in terms of eligible weeks, say in a scenario where a company has to decide, I got to lay this employee off in the long term. So how does EI get impacted by that?
That's a great question. So in terms of how EI gets impacted by that is in terms of your eligible sort of remuneration or your insurable hours, that would still be based off of what the employee is paying the employer is paying the employee. One thing to note about this is when you set up the work sharing agreement, and we know that we have to lay someone off at some point and perhaps that point is within the terms of the work sharing agreement, it's not necessary. It's kind of frowned upon if that's the case. So, what I would say is the work sharing agreement is sort of put in place to avoid those layoffs. If those layoffs are going to happen, of course, we can use it for a period of time, and then sort of after that, we can lay off employees. It might affect your eligibility if you have other departments on the work share application as well. But again, there's always some give and take. There are extenuating circumstances, and usually what happens is for each for each work share application, you're given a case manager, and that case manager has discretion to approve or disapprove certain amendments based off of what's happening. In our dealings, everything has been quite amicable and quite reasonable. So if there is an extenuating circumstance that's sort of beyond our control, and let's say we have to unfortunately lay off a department or something of that nature, usually there's a case for it, and it shouldn't be too big of an issue.
Now, when you do a work group, can you have a work group of one?
Great question. Yes. So No. The answer
Okay.
is, in order to have a work sharing unit, you need at least 2 people in that work sharing unit. Um, and in terms of the maximum, you can have as many people in that work sharing unit as you want. The other thing that we do get asked quite a bit, Dan, you sort of just prompted me there, is do we need to put the entire organization on a work sharing agreement? And the answer to that question is no. So we've had a ton of clients who have had multiple lines of business, and throughout this COVID ordeal, some of their lines of business are extremely profitable and actually getting more work, and other lines are going the opposite way. For the workshare application, we can simply choose a department that is more affected than others and put them exclusively on the workshare program.
Okay. So the next question we have in here relates to a single employee. So if you have an employee that's been salaried and now has a 50% drop in working hours, how does this, or does this program apply?
Yes, it does, and it's based off of their insurable earnings. But basically, the same types of rules would apply. Is if we're used to, if we have a full-time employee and let's say they're used to working 40 hours a week, even if they're not paid on an hourly basis, but we're bringing them in for half the time, the other half that they're no longer working would still be eligible. And basically the way it works is they'll look at an employee's historical hours worked for the previous 6 months, as well as their earnings on a weekly basis for the previous 6 months. And then whatever the organization decides to pay out or bring that employee in, the remainder would simply be what is used in the calculation for the EI payments.
Now, what about a case of a sales representative, someone who may be working on commission or as a bit more of an arm's length relationship with an organization? Would they qualify?
Absolutely. So that's actually a great question. So prior to COVID, the terms of the workshare agreement excluded anyone who was deemed essential in turning around the business. That included the management team as well as sales individuals. Since COVID, that has been amended, and those individuals are now allowed to participate in the work sharing agreement. The only real preclusion is if an individual owns more than 40% of the voting shares in an organization, they would no longer be able to apply. But essentially everyone else does. And in terms of the commission, that would be their insurable earnings. So the calculation would simply be based off of the average weekly earnings for the previous 6 months, right? So,
Okay.
if they were getting commission on a monthly basis, that would still be factored into their calculation.
So the next question actually has to do with an employee who may be already on EI benefits as a result of COVID. Would they still qualify for this program?
Yes. So if there's a situation where we've laid off an employee, and now because of the workshare program, we're going to bring them back, 100% that's the case. Usually what happens is if we are going to lay someone off and then apply for the workshare program, there's simply a little checkbox on the ROE that says, this person's being laid off, but we plan on bringing them back and you're on a workshare. You click that and it's super easy. If you haven't, which most people don't just because no one knows about it, you can still bring them back. It's just a little bit more paperwork.
Okay. So speaking of paperwork, when you are reporting on the program, maybe just summarize again what the reporting requirements are. What does it look like for a business to have to report back on if they're participating in the program?
Absolutely. So the reporting for the most part isn't too bad. It gets a little bit more complex if you have a large organization with a whole bunch of employees. But at its core, it's called the utilization report, and it's filled out once a week by the employer. And all it states is simply, employee name, SIN number, hours worked, and hours worked pre-workshare application. So you just have to fill out those four items for every single employee that's on the workshare application and submit it to the government. And then from there, it's approved, and then the payment goes directly to the employee. And sorry, while I'm just on that note, under the terms of the work sharing agreement, the employee is getting paid, not the employer. So there was some confusion about that before, where The assumption was that it was like the Q's benefit, whereas the payment would come to the employer to disperse to the employee. But under the terms of the work share agreement, the payment goes directly to the employee themselves. But in terms of the reporting, again, I apologize for deviating. It's simply a utilization report that has employee name and SIN number, hours worked, hours or historical hours worked on a weekly basis.
Okay, that's great. So we have a few minutes left. If there's any other final questions, please send them in. Oh, we got one right here. Great. Someone has just joined us a little bit late. Says this payment, does the payment to the employee come from EI, and it's the same percentage as an EI benefit payment? Do you answer that?
Yeah, that's 100% correct. The only thing that would have to happen under the terms of the work share agreement is when an employer receives confirmation that they've been allowed into the program, they have a little number. The employees would go onto the EI website, set up their online profile, and they'd plug in that number. And then from there, they'd be directly compensated.
Okay.
And yeah, and sort of one other thing too that actually just came up was, what has been the reaction of the work share application when when an organization signs up for an application or for the agreement. And sort of surprisingly, the response from the employees has been quite positive. And the reason that it has been positive is because, number one, employers are no longer laying off employees. And the second thing that employees really, really like about the program is that it shows that the employers are taking a long-term strategic view with regards to their employment. So it's not, a flash in the pan, quick program just to, save some cash. It's really about retaining employees over the long haul. And we've actually been told by our clients that their employees have stated that exactly, where they appreciate the fact that employers are taking sort of a long-term strategic view with regards to retaining employees.
Okay, this will be our last question, and it's probably a restatement again of the EI question. So does the work share impact the individual employee's total hours under an EI claim? So if an employee is part of a work share agreement, but ultimately is laid off with their total weeks eligible under EI, they're used up, therefore exhausting claim, leaving the individual with no income due to the reach back status.
So yeah, there was a lot in there. It's a little bit unique for each scenario, but essentially the employee going on the work share application would need to adhere to the EI standards and be EI eligible to go on the work share program. So if they're not, it's obviously a little bit sticky and it's a little bit unique. So happy to chat about that offline for that particular scenario. But at a 10,000-foot view, the employee needs to be eligible for EI.
Yeah, I think that's the big question for people is just the duration, like what will happen in the event that they decide to lay off, how would their weeks be reduced? So in other words, it does impact their overall EI eligibility post the program.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So if someone's already on EI and then we get the approval for the work share program, how would that affect, what they're eligible for moving forward?
Yeah, no, I think it's meaning if you're on the work share program and at the end and say you're doing that for several months and then suddenly the company decides to lay off or decides to close and lay off its employees, will it have drawn down their total? So let's say it's 40 weeks, for example, your total eligible weeks if you were to be laid off today. If you're part of this program, it's going to impact, it will draw down your overall weeks if you ultimately are laid off?
No, sorry, it would not.
Okay, it would not.
It would not. Sorry, I had to think about that for a second.
No problem. So then to clarify, then if you were to be laid off at the end of the work share, then you would be eligible for your total weeks.
Oh yes, correct.
Okay, I think that's what people were wanting to clarify. I think that's an important one. Okay, one more question. What happens if one of your employees is out sick for a couple of weeks or on vacation and you need to spread the work evenly?
Great question. So on the actual utilization report, there is a little bucket where you essentially give any reasons for variance So if someone is sick or if someone's on vacation or someone takes unpaid vacation, whatever that is, you can simply just document that, and your case manager will see that, and they'll 99% of the time just approve it. So yeah, things like that happen, and basically we just document it on the weekly reports, and we should be good to go.
All right. Well, Sean, thank you very much. There's a lot of information in less than 30 minutes, but I think you did a great job explaining that for people. Just a reminder, where can people reach you if they have additional questions?
Absolutely. So my email, and perhaps what I'll do is just very quickly, I'll just sort of
yeah, Diana put it in the chat so people can see it in the chat there.
Okay.
But yes, perfect. Okay, you can get a
Perfect.
screenshot.
Yes, I'll put my cell phone number in there as well if anyone has any other questions.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much today. We really appreciate it. And just a reminder that today's session has been recorded. It will be on VIEA's website later today that you can watch again or share with others. Please do so. Our next session will be on Tuesday, next Tuesday, May the 19th at 1 p.m. And we'll be learning more about the Vancouver Island Work Integrated Learning Project. And we will have representatives from Vancouver Island University and North Island College. So if you're looking to engage students to help support your business, this is a great program to learn about. So please join us then. Please, as I said, please pass this information on to your colleagues in your networks. And if you're not already signed up, please sign up for our newsletter at our website, VIEA.ca. Thanks very much. In the meantime, please keep good company. Have a wonderful long weekend. Stay local, buy local, and stay healthy. Take care.